Welcome to Creating Calm Parenting with Mind, Body, and Spirit. I'm Edgar Cayce, your co-host. I'm an integral leadership coach, a mother of two, and a lifelong student of the Edgar Cayce readings. And I am here with my friend and co-host, Arlene. So good to see you, Arlene.
Hi, Corinne. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Arlene Diamco, an integrative physician, a pediatrician, and a cranial osteopath. And Corinne and I have been talking through the week and all morning, and we have a great episode for you today. It is on Cayce and healthy weight. So, specifically in this episode, we're going to talk about issues of excess weight, but we're going to look at it from the understanding of the Cayce readings and delve into the origins of that excess weight from the cellular to the overall body to the mindset and spirit, and what to do about it as well. So it's really fascinating what we've read in the readings, and we can't wait to share that with you. So before we get started with that, Corinne is going to walk us through our opening meditation.
Yes, I can't wait to have this conversation as well. But before we begin, please close your eyes or bring a soft gaze toward the ground in front of you. Or if that's not possible, just let your attention turn inward and put down everything that you've been doing, creating a little space just to be with your body. Find your feet on the floor. Let your awareness travel up through your body, all the way to the top of your head. And find your breath. Notice where it's coming in through your nose, traveling down. And if it's comfortable for you, invite your breath down into your low belly. And if you can, take a moment just to cross your arms over your chest and to tap your right side and your left side with your hand. So your right hand is tapping your left shoulder and your left hand is tapping your right shoulder, one at a time, just inviting your body to settle. Find a slow rhythm that works for you. Doing just a bit of cross-lateral exercise to ground yourself during this busy time of the year. Then you can stop that. Return to your breath for just a moment. All right. All right. Thank you all so much. So, as Arlene mentioned, we're going to be talking about what the Edgar Cayce readings have to say about maintaining a healthy weight or finding a healthy weight. And to frame that conversation, we'll begin in the way that we always do with reading an excerpt from the Edgar Cayce readings. And this excerpt comes from reading 5545-2. And it says, "Keep up what we have given. Be a little patient, but know that there is being brought about those conditions that will correct the disturbances in this body, and that the body's strength, the body physical and the body mental, is gaining. Set before self mentally that the body would attain. Make it high and keep the mental lifted in that direction. For to heal the physical alone and to have the mental still discorded would only be the return of the conditions when activities would be renewed physically. But make the body physically fit, that the body mental may act through same, and make the efforts to bring about that as is desired in a mental and physical body, but make it high. Don't be satisfied with less." All right, great. So Arlene and I wanted to begin with this quote because it so beautifully weaves together the mental emotional aspect of health and the physical aspect of health, and how we can really bring our attention to both pieces of that. And then we'll also weave in the spiritual side of it as well, that grows right out of the bringing together of the physical and the mental. So we wanted to frame this conversation to really have it be big in that sense. Yeah, Arlene?
Mhm. And I do love that excerpt as well because it really highlights, the struggle that a lot of people have with back and forth issues with weight
Mhm.
and trying different diets and what's working and what's not working. And Edgar Cayce says that, well, if we don't address the whole being, then it will revert back to the issues that it was having before because the focus is not on the whole. And so to be able to begin the conversation from this bigger perspective helps us to
Mhm.
maintain a sense of higher purpose for ourselves and how we approach our own health
Mhm.
and the balance within. And what's really neat is that when we start talking about things from the cellular level to the
Mhm.
body and the organs, and then to the mindset and the overall, like, life perspective, it's you
Mhm.
can start to see that the words that we use to describe it are quite similar. And
Mm.
so, no matter what dimension or aspect of ourselves that we're looking at, if we see how it applies to every part of ourselves and to the whole of our beings as well, it will make our efforts that much more fruitful and more efficient. So, and so that's what that excerpt means to me. And then through
Yeah.
the reading, there are so many like great um, ways to address it, and he really walks us through that. Was there something that
Mhm.
you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I was just noticing when in the research that we were doing that, you know, uh, that in talking about working with your weight or lowering your weight, it was often it seemed like the reading was not, identifying that as, like, a standalone issue that
Mhm.
needed to be fixed or addressed, but more that, like, that was a consequence of certain things that were happening within the body, or that was a piece of a larger picture around health or wellness that could be addressed in different ways, but wasn't, like, a standalone thing of,
Mhm.
here's a diagnosis and a problem that we need to come at in this particular way, but it was held in a much more dimensional, multidimensional way, I would say, Arlene,
Mhm.
just right
Yes.
off the bat, that was like the first thing that we noticed.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that, he when people ask about weight in some of the readings, he would say, "Well, yes, focus on overall health, and in doing so, you will be addressing the issues with weight, but don't make it
Mhm.
about weight, don't make focus on the size. It's more about being healthy." And so,
Mhm.
I like that approach to anything that has to do with weight issues, whether it's losing weight, gaining weight, so that it's not about the size, it's about overall health. And in doing so, you
Yeah.
will address all those issues that are so commonly brought up in our society and the media and as the driving
Totally.
factor. So it's shifting the purpose from
Totally.
the
Totally.
size and the weight as, and the look as being like the driving factor to a greater
Yeah.
purpose for yourself and your overarching like idea of health.
Absolutely, and it's also pointing to you as knowing, as the knower, kind of as the physician within, to use Dr. Gladys McGarry's language to kind of talk about it in terms of like you being able to recognize and know this is working for me, this doesn't feel quite right for me, this is what I might need, and this is what I might not work for me within and then there are these larger parameters that the readings offer to begin to explore, but really holding throughout this exploration of what offerings there are for working with weight, like you are the one who will know most
Mhm,
and through how does it feel to be in your body right now, what's your energy level like, what's your how what is working and what isn't, and sort of trusting yourself as
mhm,
well.
mhm. And
Yeah.
there were certain, generalities in the readings, but they were also made for specific people. So within the general
That's
concepts,
right.
then the specifics of how to carry about, often varied. But one of the main
Mhm.
concepts in terms of addressing the diet was to lower the carbohydrate load. So,
Mm.
all of these excess carbohydrates. When we look at the alkaline diet, we see the proper ratios of food,
Mhm.
and and you will see that it's not emphasizing like carbohydrates, but depending on certain diets, there can be a large emphasis on breads and pastas and white potato and rice. And so those excess carbohydrates are putting such a demand on the body. So this
Mhm.
was a theme in the readings, was to reduce carbohydrates in the diet. It didn't mean to
Mhm.
have no carbohydrates, because we definitely need them for our brains
Mhm.
to function, but to choose ones that were healthier and to eat them in the proper ratios. So
Mhm.
instead of eating white bread, often he recommended rye bread or these rye crisp crackers, and as the only bread to be taken. And
Mhm.
for some people, he said it's you could have like whole wheat bread, but then for other people, he would say not even whole wheat bread, just rye bread if you eat any. And for
Mhm.
many people, he said, I mean, he didn't really recommend white potato in general. He said
Mhm.
if you had white potato, to eat the skins of it if you could develop a taste for it, which I love. So I was trying to think of like ways to cook just the potato skin, um, and yeah, that would be a whole other conversation. But then for other
Yeah.
people, he said, you could have some sweet potato or yam. And then for others, he said, don't even have any kind of potato at all. So I'm just
Mhm.
mentioning these variations so that you can start to feel like what feels good for your body. And in general,
Yeah.
it's like reduce the carbohydrates, so avoid the white potato. But can you handle some of the root veggies, or is there a period of time where actually it would be good to just be more strict about it? There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to approach it. It's more about actually just starting to take the steps
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
to change that diet to reduce the
Mhm.
carbohydrate load. And
Mhm.
another interesting he mentioned was like if you had any of the rye bread or any healthy bread, to toast the bread before eating. And I did look that up, and I found that toasted bread has a lower glycemic index than bread that's not toasted. So there these very interesting things. You might call them like health hacks, but
Mhm.
Edgar Cayce was already bringing them up so many decades
Mhm.
ago, like almost a
Yeah.
century ago. Some of these things. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, those are some neat tidbits about like how to approach carbohydrates and in the diet.
Yes, and the next thing that he mentioned was to restore a normal balance and efficiency of eliminations throughout the body, the lymphatics and the liver, kidney, lungs, and skin, the way that we move toxins, the organs that move toxins out of our bodies. So, for as we all of the health conversations that we've had from the readings, these are not surprises that are coming to the forefront here in terms of working with alkalinity and acidity, and then also really focusing on making sure that you are moving the toxins, moving the lymph, moving things out. And that, but it is interesting to think about in the context of maintaining a healthy weight or finding a healthy weight, that like the eliminations is really, it's not just what you're putting in or how much you're putting in, but it's also really making sure that everything's able to move through in a really healthy way. And so, he often would recommend getting a colonic, getting massage, um, working with taking a little bit of olive oil, sometimes, especially at the end of the apple diet, or in work, that there would be like a little intake of olive oil and steam baths. And the apple diet was maybe mentioned as part of this as just like a deep cleansing of going on a 3-day sort of apple fast where you're eating. He recommended, what kind of apples was it that he
It was like
recommended? Or any?
the delicious or Jonathan
Mhm.
apple. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So those
Yeah.
varieties, they have like more bumps at the bottoms,
Mhm.
and that helps to soften the bile and just clean out things. And again, it varies how people are able to um, to tolerate these different diets, and so to listen to
Right.
yourself and to your body. But some people did require this deeper cleanse to kind of reset the system and clear the colon out, to
Yeah.
soften the bile and
Yeah.
get their liver going, and then to have a little bit of olive oil after that
Mhm.
to help flush the liver and the gallbladder. And
Mhm.
if we can think about this like in that overarching view too, of just like, okay, making sure that um, the body is eliminating things that it doesn't need, so it's not holding on to toxins and things that
Mhm.
are no longer healthy for it. But the same thing
Mhm.
in our lives too. It's like, how can we look at our lives as to what are we holding on to that no longer serves us, and
Mhm.
to have that bigger perspective too, because you can think about the weight as this protective mechanism, like shielding
Mhm.
us from things that are difficult, and so it's like a clinging on to something like a security blanket in a way. And so are there ways we can start to look at our lives and see, what things can I let go of? And it's springtime, so it's actually a nice time to think about like that spring cleansing and letting
Mhm.
go of things. And
Mhm.
I would say to think about that, um, even in tandem with looking at the how you can improve your eliminations physically. So,
Mhm.
um, and I mean, hey, Dr. Gladys McGarry, she gets a massage once a week, and she's 103. So if she can
Mhm.
do it, I feel like we all can like benefit from that somehow. And the
Mhm.
next thing he was talking about was to bring about changes in the cells of the intestinal tract, which will
Mm.
reverse the tendency of those cells to turn most things into sugar. So this was really fascinating to me
Mhm.
because in the readings, he was alluding to the cells not functioning properly in the digestive tract. And and we know that excess carbohydrates affects the cellular function in many ways. So one, it alters the gut flora, and then we see patterns that tend to be associated with overeating and being overweight. And
Mhm.
if you kind of throw that gut flora towards uh, a pattern that the less friendly flora is craving sugar and craving carbohydrates, it will literally send signals to your nervous system to seek out those kinds of things. So if you feel like it's hard and you don't have the willpower to avoid certain things, that there's a reason for it, because this gut flora is actually working with your nervous system and it's trying to feed itself. At the same time, it's not
Mhm.
quite in balance with the body because it's not great to make your host unhealthy. So,
Mhm.
but the excess carbohydrates, it can also impair the gut barrier. So you might leak in things that you might otherwise keep out. It changes your lipid profile, so your cholesterol, your triglycerides, making you more prone to something that's called metabolic syndrome that affects your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your weight, and your insulin and blood sugar balance. And then this excess carbohydrate intake also decreases the cellular antioxidants, which actually puts the cells at risk to deteriorate. So if your cells start to
Mm.
deteriorate in the gut, I mean, that's going to deteriorate the body overall. And
Mhm.
there was a recent study done at Brigham and Women's and Boston Medical Center. This was a Harvard study that showed that excess carbohydrates, they contribute to metabolic dysfunction by blocking the synthesis of important antioxidants. It's also using up the antioxidants because in order for the cells to take in the sugars, it's using up these antioxidants that are no longer available to help the cell detox and
Hmm.
to function well. So your mitochondria need that for energy, your cells need it for proper detoxification. So that's why it's like if we look at the cellular level, it's the same thing we're talking about as the overall like gut function, being able to
Mhm.
detox and move regularly. And then the overall life of like, oh, okay, what am I
Mhm.
not letting go of. So that's really interesting. And then the Cayce
Mhm.
readings had a way to address this dysfunction of the
Mm.
cells and to help
Mhm.
improve the cellular function in the gut. And that is with
Mhm.
Concord grape juice. And Concord grape juice is packed with antioxidants. It does not contribute to weight gain, and it actually can be beneficial to blood sugar balance. And it's amazing because um, I have some right here, so I'll show you. It's you see how dark it is, and so
Mhm.
it's like getting the benefit of that red wine and all these polyphenols without the alcohol. So it's
Mhm.
very healthy for you. And Casey recommended taking that about 30 minutes before meal times, and it varied in terms of like how much. It could be an ounce to 2 to 3 ounces, diluted with
Mhm.
water, not
Mhm.
carbonated water. Um, and 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 he, because he recommended that before the meals, it made the cells busy so that
Mhm.
it was taking care of the sugars from the Concord grape juice. It was also presented with so many antioxidants from that beautiful color of the grape juice. And so by the time you were having a meal, that those cells would not be taking in the excess sugars. And so that's
Mhm.
fascinating for me. And then when you do this regularly, it gives a chance for the cells to regenerate. And it
Mhm.
takes about a week for cells to regenerate. So it does take some consistency, but I would say that maybe I would say you would see some sort of shift within a couple weeks, depending on what's going on and other factors that might be contributing to the cellular deterioration. But if you kept it really clean, like following the alkaline diet, reducing the carbohydrates, taking the Concord grape juice regularly, once
Mhm.
a day or multiple times a day before the meal times, then this
Mhm.
could, over time, contribute to rebalancing weight and improving gut function and overall function of the body. So,
Yeah, which is just it's just so fascinating to dive in a little bit to, like, what is actually happening when you're drinking a little bit of grape juice, either, like, 1 to 2 with, an ounce of water in there or stronger grape juice with less water, but 30 minutes before each meal, and then oftentimes too, before bed, 30 minutes before
mhm.
bed as well, that there's as I listen to you described it and I reading after reading where some amount of grape juice is included in the recommendations for working with your weight, it feels like the grape juice that there are these cells that are being like overtaxed in order to
Yes.
handle what's coming in to the body, and they're working so hard and they're kind of adapting to do their best to be able to process
Uh-huh.
the sugars, so they're and that adaption starts to have them function abnormally in some way, and that
Yeah.
this grape juice is like this like nourishing bath, this like a whole this healing like literal bath that comes on them where they're getting the antioxidants, they're being resupplied with the antioxidants that they need, they're being asked to process some not too much so they can work in a normal functioning way, and they're occupied doing it, so they're not sending there's not they don't need to they're not looking for more sugars to try and process, right? They're
Right.
just like
Right.
doing it, so our desire to intake certain foods, to eat certain things changes because of them not sending these signals. This is my
Mhm.
non-medical sort of processing of what it is that's happening, and it's just so amazing to think that, with
Uh-huh.
again, consistency and persistency, kind of sticking with this, it's not a light switch that turns on and all of a sudden these cells are better, but that just reading the case histories of
Uh-huh.
this little bit of grape juice really being able to heal these like totally change the cells so that the
Yes.
way that we want to eat changes and how we digest our food changes as well. And yeah, it's
It
totally
was way
fascinating.
way ahead of its time because we're just starting to fill in the understanding, and there's still so many gaps in our understanding of it, from
Right.
a modern science perspective, but the fact that these recommendations were made, like, that long ago, and we didn't
Yeah.
have these scientific perspectives, and now we're able to understand it more. It's so satisfying for me, like, for my whole brain to be able to understand it in
Yeah.
so many different ways. And even just, like, I'm
Yeah.
like, "Wow, who would recommend juice before bedtime?" I was like, "That's so interesting."
Right.
But if you understand that, oh, it's regenerative to the cells, and that it's not
Yeah.
taxing the blood sugars. So it's like, "Oh, okay, so
Right.
it's not going to give that boost that will interfere with sleep." And, sleep is actually a great time for regeneration and detoxification. So it's helping
Yeah.
it during this, time where,
Yeah.
yeah, it gives it a little boost for that rejuvenation and
Totally.
detoxification. So
Totally.
that's so fascinating.
So
So
fascinating. Absolutely.
mhm,
Yep.
yeah.
So the fourth area that the readings recommended us to take a look at when we're working with this is to be sure that we're working to balance the glandular system. And I know that's pretty common, a pretty common thing in medicine today in terms of working with weight, Arlene. So maybe you can just sort of synthesize what you feel like the readings are offering to this, discussion of
Mhm.
glands as it relates to weight. Yeah.
Mhm. Sometimes there were more specifics regarding the glands for the individual, and I know a
Hmm.
lot of times when people start to think about issues of overweight and weight loss, they automatically go to
Hmm.
hormones and thyroid, which is not the case for everybody, but there are specific situations where thyroid needs to be addressed, and so that's something to check in with your physician, make sure you're getting, like,
Hmm.
proper more extensive lab measurements to see if that is something that needs to be addressed. And he had mentioned etomidine for that, but he also that's to be used with physician guidance.
Yeah.
It's not just about the thyroid too. We have so many endocrine organs, and it's also the adrenals. So those have to do
Hmm.
with your salt balance, your insulin balance, your sex hormones, your stress hormones. So
Mhm,
it's all of these glands need to be working together. And then even
mhm.
within the intestines themselves, you're gonna have, like, these small microglandular functions, and
Yeah.
and they're gonna be sending signals to the cell, to the gut, and he often, sometimes he mentioned, like, pineal gland,
Mhm.
and the pituitary. So it could be any glandular function, and the point is
Yeah.
that these need to be in sync. They need to be in harmony, with each
Mhm.
other. So
Yeah.
we're not gonna get in too much of the specifics of that because it is
Mhm.
so individualized in terms of, like, what glands need help for you if they do, and
Mhm.
how can we integrate that even more? But it's just
Mhm.
pointing at, like, the need to talk about healthy weight from this multidimensional perspective,
Mhm.
and not to leave it at any one thing. Um,
Mhm.
it just, even with, like, blood sugar balance and all those things, sometimes, like, within the modern medicine perspective, it gets so focused on one small detail, like the sugars must be balanced, and so just do anything to make that number look right.
Mhm.
And, but they're actually coming out with more research showing this understanding of, like, oh, well, if we, are asking the cells to if the cells are having a hard time and taking in too much glucose, and then we're asking
Mhm.
them to take in more sugar, and that sugar is depleting the antioxidants and leading to, like, cellular degeneration. It's like, until we address the overall component of, like, what's driving these things, um, we're kind of missing the mark. So
Mhm.
it's taking a more holistic perspective. And
Mhm.
along those lines, so this fifth recommendation was to correct other abnormalities which may be present, nervous system incoordination, circulatory system imbalance, and more. And there were different ways to do that. One that was mentioned again was using the Radiac, which we have talked about before. And
Mhm.
um, and then, Corinne, would you read this excerpt about
Absolutely.
the mindset and
Yeah.
spirit, which I really love?
Yeah, it's so beautiful. So this excerpt comes from 1183-2, and it says, "Then the diet. This should be not so rigid as to appear that you can't do this or you can't do that, but rather let the attitudes be everything that is eaten, as well as every activity, purposeful in conception, constructive in nature. Analyze that. Purposeful in activity, constructive in nature. Yeah. Yeah. So I know so often in our culture when we're working, how our bodies look is such an there can be so many rules and so many, it can become so oppressive to think, and we can start to come up with, in order for this, in order for me to look this way, I have to do this. And if I'm not doing this, then I'm not doing a good enough job. And it can start to become exhausted and an overworked part of our lives that can bring us a lot of sadness and distress. And what I think Arlene and I really resonate toward with this excerpt is to really let go of that, to not, to, if you notice yourself being rigid, to let it go and come back to what is purposeful in conception. How am I being purposeful in what I'm doing? What is my purpose here? And constructive as in helpful. Constructive can mean helpful. And what is helpful in nature? What will help me here feel okay? And working with the mind in that way is essential to how we relate to what our physical bodies actually look like. And I think a lot of times when we want our bodies to look a certain way, there's a history and strong patterns of being incredibly rough with ourselves, doing things that are not helpful, either in how we're talking to ourselves, the rules that we're setting, or how we're, what we're allowing ourselves to not eat or to do or not do, and all of these things. And that there's this sort of oxymoron and real path of practice of how can I be helpful to myself? What is my purpose in doing this? And learning to relate to ourselves in loving ways, which is very difficult, sometimes more difficult or just as difficult as making changes to the foods that we put into our body and what we're doing with ourselves. And that, but uh, that it is so essential and such a piece of this working with finding a healthy weight for ourselves and our loved ones. So noticing
Mhm.
the way that we're talking to ourselves. Yeah.
And that's the endless patience with ourselves and,
Yeah.
the persistence and consistency, but with the purpose held as the guide and not the goal, like
Yeah.
the idea that I want to lose this weight or, is the purpose is much higher than that.
Yeah.
And so if we use that to guide every step of I would like to be loving to myself. I hope to nourish myself. My intention is to provide my body with things that are nourishing for me, to provide my mind with things that are nourishing for me, and to walk
Mhm.
that talk, and then also to like let go of things that are no longer needed, to exhale those things. So it's a constant flow through the life, and then it doesn't have to rely on the rigidity of the rules and, like, feeling
Mhm.
bad things or being harsh on yourself for not following rules because, if it's more about, like, "Oh, okay, in this moment, what would I like to do
Mhm.
to help myself, to take care of myself?" And then
Yeah.
when you go on to the next moment, maybe you feel like you slipped or, you didn't do exactly what you had hoped for, but that's okay because then you have a fresh new moment. And so not to
Mhm.
be rigid and like hold on to that moment that's already passed, because then you have
Mhm.
another moment and you can move into that next moment, just like breath by breath, like step by step,
Mhm.
and and not to hold on to maybe times when we feel like we didn't do our best or we failed or whatever things we're saying to ourselves, and to let ourselves to have the grace to let ourselves to move on to the next moment and see what we would like to do
Mhm.
that moment. So that's letting the purpose be that guiding um, force for you. And then there's
Yeah.
always a light because you're always walking in the light and following this light, and and then that's what it says in the Casey readings. Then turn your face towards the light and the shadows will fall behind.
Yeah. And maybe we can just end uh, with an offering that came from an Edgar Cayce reading where a man was asking how he could work with his weight. And there was a lot of, met all of the things that we've talked about today individualized for this particular person. And then he asked for some spiritual advice that would be helpful during the
Mm.
present chaotic condition of the world, which is certainly true today in terms of the chaos that we're all still experiencing. And the reading offers for this gentleman, let that mind be in thee, with those attitudes of not condemning any, but giving those of every position their right of thought. For know that no individual is in any position of power or might, or of any other, save an opportunity for meeting those problems that are in there, that are theirs in relationship to others and to the world. Hence, no animosity, no hate. These should be the attitudes of this entity as well as of others at this time. So that comes from reading 470:32. So just that invitation of letting other people do as they will, letting yourself feel the freedom to do as you will, sort of trusting yourself to know what you need and what is right for you, and knowing that we're all on this path of sort of meeting meeting our opportunities to grow in our relationship to other people and in this world, and that we don't need to hold on to power over or being or feeling like others have power over us at this time, but allowing ourselves the space to be on our own path and really allowing others the space to be on their
Mhm.
path as well.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
getting angry at yourself for stumbling, and, that's really beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do as well. Well, thank you for so much for this exploration. I think Concord grape juice is a highlight for sure in terms of what I'll be bringing into my family's life, and so much else just in terms of how to work with finding a healthy weight and holding all of the different pieces together and uh, of what health means. So thank you so much, Arlene, for bringing your physician's perspective to all of this and bringing all of the research that we're learning about now and sort of illuminating why the readings were saying what they were saying about this topic. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Thank you, Corinne. I love talking to you always and delving into these readings and finding these nuggets of gold that we can bring to everyone and continue in this way. So thanks everyone for being here too.